Alejandro.
Good evening. Great crowd. This is possible only because here we are with producer Emma Thomas. And director Mr. Christopher Nolan. See how many people is outside, guys. We are lucky to be here. So anyway, I'm so happy to be here. Christopher and I met when we were young. Well, he's still young. There's snow in my dirt. You are a little very young. What's going on? Well,
He's blonde, you don't see.
You don't see great, and I shaved. I have the white, yeah. No, we met many years ago with you with Morris Paris. Amazing film. Yeah, that's how long ago it was.
Can you imagine? Memento, Amores Perros, we were playing with structures, but you keep, man, just like playing with time and space and subject matters that really blow our minds. And now, you got into the mind of one of the guys that create their own nightmares. And it's incredible. I mean, I would like to ask you, there's so many things to ask you, but I think one of the things that I'm very curious is solely this character, Oppenheimer, which basically is so complex and politically, socially, the time, all the things that was going on in his life, in the personal, intellectual thing. And then you have this massive biography of the life of one of the guys that has a complex life. I would like to ask, well, first, in the idea, when you read that, what was your, structurally, that you are so interested with the structures that you play with your films, now going to the mind of this guy, when you have such a massive amount of information, such important things to play with, I would like two things. What was the first spark that got you into, I need to make a film about this guy? What was that moment, if you remember, what was the connection? What kind of connection you made with him? And secondly, in order to get what you got in this 3-hour movie to reduce everything in this short amount of time, a life so complex, what was the spine? Meaning, what you left out and what was the guidance for you to say, this is what is guiding me? It was the facts, it was the emotional truth, the emotional thing, the political things, the things that you would like to say, and what was your guide to include in this film, what this film ended up being? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Incredible, massive work that you did.
Well, thank you. I think the answer is the same for both questions in a way, because the thing that had struck me about Oppenheimer's story, and I actually included a reference to it in my previous film, Tenet, it's this moment at which, in the lead up to the Manhattan Project, the scientists realized they couldn't completely eliminate the possibility of a chain reaction that would destroy the world, and yet they went ahead. That had stuck with me, and I'd use it as an analogy for the science fiction concept of Tenet. But looking at the real world stakes of that, I realized, as filmmakers, we're always looking for what's the most dramatic story, what's the extreme that you can look at, and I just don't know of as dramatic a moment as that in history. And so, reading American Prometheus, which is Pulitzer Prize winning, it's a 700-page, 25 years in the making biography of Oppenheimer with an incredible amount of information, remembered? What were the things that struck me? What did I want to tell people about Oppenheimer after I read the book? That felt like what I needed to follow in terms of the dramatic construct, and that tended to embrace all the different facets you're talking about, whether the political, the personal, whatever, because there are always things that once you engage with the story that you wanted to tell people about. And some of those things were political, some of them were historical, and some of them were very personal. And so that was the spine. You were asking the spine. That was the sort of beginning of the process.
And I would say that imagining you, it's easy sometimes to write, as in Dorking or other films that are incredibly complex in terms of action, with the Germans attack, or whatever we would like to write as filmmakers in the page is very easy. But then when you have to produce it, that's another story. So as a couple, I want to ask you, Emma, how do you deal with this relation? And suddenly when you read these scripts and suddenly you're discussing about all the challenges of making whatever Chris dreams, how you deal with this relation about how you say, Chris, this is impossible. Shut your mouth. How that works?
Well, it's different on every movie, to be honest. I mean, I think that the interesting thing, I think the hardest one to really sort of imagine how we were going to do everything in the script was actually Inception, because that was sort of massively ambitious just from a sort of production. I read that script and I just didn't understand what he had in mind.
I want to divorce tomorrow.
You really think where it says, that basically Paris folds up in front of somebody's face and you're like, how?
I'm with Leo DiCaprio there, that's another time. That was more difficult than part. I'm joking, okay? Watch out tonight. Social media is terrible. The humor doesn't translate well. Sorry.
But this film, it was actually kind of interesting because I felt like when I read the book, that was when I really didn't understand how we were going to do this, because it's, as Chris said, it's just an enormous book, and there are so many elements, and I couldn't really understand how he was going to digest that and make it make it digestible for an audience. I knew he wanted to make it as a summer blockbuster, and that really seemed challenging to me. It wasn't so much the production challenges, it was more, okay, well, how is he going to make this something that people are going to want to watch and be entertained by when it's about such a huge subject? We knew it was going to be an R-rated movie, and in so many ways it was challenging, and I think it was more a sort of business challenge than it was a sort of logistical challenge. Except that I also knew that we were going to have to, all the conversations we had early on was, well, we have to make it for a reasonable amount of money if we have any hope of working again. and so that's where the sort of challenge came, was sort of trying to figure out how to make something that was so epic in scope, but for, probably half what anyone else made it for.
That's a great point, because honestly, when success arrives, it's true that people say, oh, it's obvious, it's all time, come on. But it's such a risky film in terms of subject, and so there's a lot of conversations, intellectual themes, complex. And actually, I think it's one of the most incredible quiet films that you have in terms of action and staging. You know what I mean? So it's a locked camera, mostly with great kind of shots, but it's about the ideas that were behind these people and the context. So you were very conscious about that. And I would like to ask you grammatically, you could have made a very stagey, powerful, muscular film, a son of yours, but you suddenly decide to have an incredible huge camera, in incredible small rooms, faces, dialogue, and that grammar of stills, and how they flow, the architectural flow of each of them. So, is that was something that you conceived very early, or you arrived to that conclusion that that's the way quietly I want to show and be observing these people? Like was not your style necessarily, it was something that is new for you.
Yeah, I mean, the way I approach those sort of issues increasingly, as I've gotten older, done more films, I have increasing confidence to not plan too far ahead in terms of technique, and so involve people, involve Hoyt van Hoyt, my director of photography, Ruth de Jong, the designer of the film, really, and start exploring where does the story take us. Hoyt and I, we've used the IMAX format for years, these huge cameras, and over the years we've become more and more interested in what it could do to the face. It gives you landscapes, it gives you epic shots, but it also does incredible things. It's like portraiture, it's like medium format photography, shallow focus portraiture. So on that huge screen, faces really come to life. And so you start making a series of choices, and a feeling as you start to do hair and makeup tests, and you make choices like, okay, can we make black and white film? Could Kodak make that for us in large format, which you've never done before, so that we can do the black and white as well as the color. And then we start screening these tests on an IMAX screen, and that passion that you develop for how things work, you start to develop the whole world of the film, to the point where late in the prep process, we needed to find our room 2022, which is the number of the room where the security units took place. And it wasn't a glamorous courtroom, it was this very, Strauss really tried to sweep the whole thing under the rug. And Ruth and I found this very shabby sort of room inside the factory that was about the size of the real room. And it was tiny, it was 7 feet wide, so we got Hoyt in there and we said, look, we're thinking maybe we should actually shoot in this real room. And is that crazy? Do you think we can do it? And he totally loved it. He was like, no, that you want to show how intimate, how raw this whole thing was, having people who, were testifying against him. He's sitting 3 feet behind him on a couch. All that was how it happened in real life. So, we took this huge, 3-foot-long IMAX camera and just jammed it into the room. And we jammed it. I was sitting under the table, people in the next room, and it was weeks of horrible claustrophobia. But you felt it play the drama. You felt the actors respond all crammed in there, and you also visually, when you look at the dailies, you felt how unpleasant and small that was.
And the sound of that camera, and you have to talk a lot.
It was a combination of things. A lot of it is what we call dry takes, which is what I learned. I mean, Aero and I learned doing 16mm films, independent films, which is where we started, where you would just run the takes, and then turn the camera off because you couldn't afford to do any more takes with the camera. So then you just run the scene, you record dialogue again and again. And with software these days, with Pro Tools, it's very flexible in terms of fitting dialogue once you've done that. So very often it's a case of either shooting with a quieter camera, alternate takes, or just doing dry takes and using those. So a combination of different techniques.
That's amazing technique. I would like to say too that something that got my attention is Murphy, the actor, basically gives very little. And this camera, it's like our faces is like a map, right? So, I mean, it's a map of our lives. So you think you see a guy that has had a miserable life, he has a miserable face. Right? Are you laughing? So in a way, the face of him, in a way, it gives up very little. And it's because obviously the camera is just there and it grabs every porous kind of thing, you see everything. And so I appreciate very much that, because I have to understand that Oppenheimer was exactly the definition of reality, which is paradox and contradiction, right? And he was not even know what he was doing. And you put the camera on him, so it's a very silent character in a way that I didn't know too much about him. At the same time, I want to ask you something. There's a lot of music all the time. And it's a paradox that such a silent character suddenly there's music. Can you explain me how the music, the grammatic work for you, what you were looking at the
me, with music is they never use temp score, so they never use existing film score. All the composer very early. Ludwig Göransson did an amazing job, I think, with the music on this and for Tenet, the previous film. I didn't have preconceptions about the music beyond I wanted him to base it on violin because it felt like the violin could give you that shift between awful tension and romanticism just in the playing and in the feel. So he took that, he did demos, gave the tracks before we even started shooting. So I had some simple ideas already, and then we start layering that in as we watch the film. And the way Jen, who edited the film and stuff, we first cut silently and just with dialogue.
Wow.
Then we start putting in sound effects, and then we start layering music. And I think every film I've ever done, but I think even when you first see it, there's not a lot of music, and we all go, yeah, it doesn't need that much music, it'll be fine. And somehow 6 months later, everything's covered in music. And how did that happen? But it grows naturally, and so we, Emma and myself and Jen and Ludwig, we watch the film every week. Every Friday we'd screen the whole thing, look at what he had done for us. He would go away and work for a week, and as we would find the cut, we'd find the music. Because to me, the music just has to be an integral part of the film. It's not a source that you layer on afterwards. It's sort of growing with the narrative and helping the narrative. And so, as far as the logic of how things work, it tends to be more instinctive than that. I will say in the last act, the focus on the security hearings, I did go to Ludwig and say, I need a piece of very rhythmic music, very tense music. I want to play this like thriller. And it has to sustain for, eventually it became like 10 minutes, but the first cut I think was half an hour or something. So I was having to give these tracks to just keep that tension. So it evolves over time.
So it was something that you discovered in post-production, that you were adding, and so you start feeling, your feeling needs to be there. It was not planned that way.
I have to point out that, Ludwig is involved even, when Chris was talking about the hair and makeup tests that we were doing in pre-production, Ludwig was there then. He came and, we were sitting watching the, even when we were doing hair and makeup tests, we also had a visual effects and special effects team sort of shooting endless minutes of the crazy visuals for the physics of the thing, and we would sit there for just mesmerized by those images on the screen. And Ludwig was there from that point on, so he's an integral part of the process, even before we started shooting proper. But it is a very organic process in terms of that, as Chris said, we watch every Friday, and it builds as the music does.
I want to say too, one of the most incredible moments of the film is probably when the bomb explodes, right? That's kind of a moment that we are expecting, and juxtaposed with the music that is constant. That moment felt relevant because it was silent, and with the images and what we know what that consequences will be, the life of all of us now, our kids. I have a question of structure and decision, which for me is crucial. Which I think I understand what I want to ask you. I will tell you what I thought, but maybe I'm completely wrong. But it's important for me to understand what you thought, which is after the bomb, suddenly everything turns into this incredible circus of political witch hunt and communism and accusations and all that, which speaks a lot in my point of view, and maybe I'm wrong about the double moral of a government that sustained that and then killed the guy who really made that for them. And then this guy, for me, that suddenly turned his head to other, yeah, it was a bomb, but I didn't kill 100 Japanese. And then it turns into this political tournament. But for me, suddenly there was another way, which is the consequence of now, that the world we are living, which in a way for me was AI, climate change, all these oil fucking guys, these AI guys, they are insane. Frankenstein creators with no responsibility. And suddenly when it turns into the political accusation, suddenly I felt, what was that decision about? And not maybe to go to Japanese people die, the things that we are living, so all the things that tree. What was your intention about suddenly to realize or to put that in the middle and the third act of your movie about that negotiation? What means for you that moment of suddenly how the country turns to him and how that, I mean, I would like to understand if, am I right about that is a comment about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a line in The Dark Knight that I wish I had written, but my brother wrote it. Where it says, you know, you either die a hero or you live long enough to become a villain. And when my brother put that in that script, I was like, that sounds cool, but I don't know what it means. I was like, no, but all right. I sort of trusted him and left it in, and then it's over the years, it's one of the things in that film that stuck with me and has grown more and more. And when I looked at this story, I felt very strongly that particularly in American culture, I think, that tends to be, you know, the arc of public figures and people who get very involved in extremely important and sometimes controversial events. You know, you see this happening with public figures regularly, and I think in the case of Oppenheimer, that was very much sort of forced upon him. What I found in the story, and maybe you should speak to it, but what I found was there was a moment. This was the first time scientists had ever got involved in a war. It's the first time they'd ever sort of, you know, truly like won the war, essentially. And so American society in particular turned around and went, okay, you scientists, you're in charge now, you tell us where to go, you know. And that lasted just about as long as it took the establishment to figure out that they needed to get rid of it. And Oppenheimer became the kind of sacrificial victim of that. That's an aspect of it that underlies all of this. It's like they couldn't have people like Oppenheimer who had such credibility with the rest of the world, considered this genius, who owned, you know, atomic power in a way, and would pontificate, would talk about what should be done with it. I don't think that was a tenable thing in the sort of American power structure. And so, more visibly than any other individual that I know of in history, he had to be immediately sort of, you know, put in his place, essentially, taken out of the equation. And a lot of the things he did that seemed possibly naive or a little strange or a little, you know, for such a strategic mind, I think a lot of it was his attempt to continue to have a voice in what was going on. Partly out of a sense of, perhaps out of a sense of guilt, but also out of a sense of trying to help the world. But you should speak to it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what you said, but no, I mean, but I find the sort of that you know, that half of the film fascinating, because for me that's kind of all I mean, that's how I didn't know that much about Oppenheimer until I read the book, and you know, I knew sort of what Chris had told me, and you know, he referenced it in Tenet and so on, but what I really knew about Oppenheimer was a lot to do with the way he was torn down later. And as somebody who's always had a sort of interest in history, I find it kind of fascinating to watch that bit of the film and really think about how much of what we understand of what has come before us is dictated by politics around, you know, sort of events in history. And they're not necessarily related to the truth, objective truth of what has happened. Of course, what objective truth is, you know, who knows. But it's just a sort of, to me the whole story is a story about, you know, actions and consequences, whether that be the bomb itself, but also the act of making the bomb, and the fact that that could not be allowed to just live, you know, on its own merit.
Is there also a lot of construction? I mean, you build a lot of sets.
We tend to, with wherever possible, shoot on location. Obviously, and I actually had never been to Los Alamos until we got into this, but the Los Alamos that we're talking about in this story no longer exists. It is now
Nothing.
Very modern town. I mean, you know, the lab is still there. We actually shot in some of the real locations that still look kind of the same. So the house that they lived in Los Alamos, the Fuller Lodge, where you know, the big rally takes place. That looks very similar, but the exterior of the town looks completely different these days. You know, there's Starbucks in every corner. So we had to build the town as they built it, which was a massive endeavour. But we had a very talented production designer and a big team.
Massive because the size of it, or what was the challenge about it?
We had to build roads to get to it. You know, we were sort of on the top of a mesa, and again, you know, budget issues. But we found this fantastic. Chris and Ruth found a location that doubled very well, and it looked, I mean, so spectacular. And I think really communicated the isolation that these people were having to live in while they built the gadget. But yes, I mean, really, for the most part, we were on location, even if there were sort of sets that we had built on location, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I've always found that real world scale is impossible to reproduce with set. I mean, you know, the size of stages, the restrictions of them, being in a real place, or building into a real place. You know, for me, the best way to get really the real world feeling of scale. And Ruth did an incredible job building those exteriors. I had originally wanted to build interiors and exteriors on the same set so that we could kind of live in Los Alamos for months and wait for the right weather and that kind of thing. It wasn't practical, the budget we had, so she revisited Los Alamos, and as I was saying, some of the interiors there. So we got to be part of that history of Fuller Lodge and the Oppenheimer's house. So there were balances between the places. So we had to finish shooting our exterior set very quickly. We weren't there very long, but we got lucky with the weather. We got the weather we needed. The storms came in as we needed, and so it all worked out. And then for the Trinity test, Ruth and her team, they just built a replica of the 120-foot tower. They built exactly the way it was. I went to the real Trinity site with Ruth. It was too difficult to shoot there because it's still a live, you know, army firing range, and they only open it twice a year, I think, or whatever. So that wasn't practical. But what she figured out was to just go further down the same mountain range and find private land that matched. And so she built this extraordinary replica out in Pleasant. And that just gives you such a connection with history, such an exciting feeling of what those people have gone through.
One of the fascinating things that I like about the film is the sexual life of Oppenheimer. Reading the Kama Sutra. I love that scene. Reading the Kama Sutra. Are they going to make love? Or they read it? Or are they talking about it? But I would like to approach that because it's obviously a big thing about his own inner life. And you portray almost a very, I don't think he was an intellectual, sexual guy. Or he was, I don't know, it's sort of like a womanizer, but he was kind of maybe as an intellectual in a sense. I don't know what was. I think you should say. They are playing what was the restrictions?
No, the importance of the sexuality from the reading of American Prometheus, it was very clear that he was someone who was a late bloomer sexually, and he dealt with an incredible amount of, call it nervous energy, neurosis, you know, as a virginal young man trying to explore these very, very high level intellectual ideas about quantum physics and the stresses and strains. I mean, we talked about this relationship, which is suggesting a real that, you know, when he sees to understand the world, these guys who are dealing with this absolute shift in how you even conceive of atoms, things like that. Huge mental effort. But what I wanted to find was this thread of energy in him, a visual energy, the visualizations. I wanted to treat it almost like a superpower he hasn't learned how to harness or something. And sexuality was very much part of that. And I think Florence Pugh playing Jean Tatlock, you know, when she says you just need to get laid or whatever, you know, I think she's onto something, and I think he pivoted very quickly in his 20s to be a ladies' man in a major way. It was a huge part of his life. And there was no getting around. This is why, whenever I first talked about it, it always has been an R-rated film, because there's no getting around if you're going to examine the whole security proceedings against it, all the accusations against it, you can't ignore the fact that while he was engaged in the most secret wartime project that there's ever been, he was cheating on his wife in a sexual relationship with a communist, a known communist. And he went and spent the night with her. There are people who will give a torturous interpretation of that event and say they didn't sleep together, they just chatted all night, whatever. I don't know, I wasn't in the room. I know what I think from what I've read, and I think it makes his story much richer and much more interesting to realize that he did make terrible mistakes. It's not entirely different from this basic theme of, I didn't want to make a film about scientists who were too stupid to realize how bad nuclear weapons were. They knew exactly what they were doing. They just felt and believed they had to do it because they were in this race against the Nazis. So it makes it a much more compelling story to me that they're having to do these things. And so Oppenheimer, in all these aspects, in all the ways in which that nervous energy manifests itself, and literally, we show the background behind him shaking at times and things. We try to find visual and oral representations of this sort of inner energy that's reflected in the physics and the energy he sees in dull matter. He sees in this, he sees energy, everything's made of energy waves, and so the release of that ultimately is this incredibly destructive force.
It's very, in that sense, it's exactly right. So, it's the only escape he had. No? So, his mind and all the. Do you think, it's a question for both of you, do you think at the end he really realized what he did? That what was the conscience that he had, or he was willful denial? I mean, if there was something that he denied, what do you think of if he really understood what he did? Maybe.
I mean, he was a smart man, so I think he has to have done it. What's interesting to me is I think that when I truly understood how Chris was going to make this film was when he said that he figured out what the end of the film was going to be and described the last shot and the last lines. And to me, I mean, how could he not? I mean, I think that denial is a very powerful thing, but how could he not have understood what he thought?
No, but that's very good. I like what you said. Is what you think that he knew. Nobody knows, but what do you think, Chris?
I mean, the thing that drew me to the story was the third act, was the second half. Once I sort of learned more about it, because what you see in his story is the person very, very cleverly, intellectually, with incredible rationalizations, never ever apologized for what he'd done. Never said specifically that he was sorry about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was none of that. But his actions are the actions of a very, very guilt-ridden person. And so he would claim not to feel guilt. He would say that that wasn't. There was a play that was written about him where they gave him a monologue where he was sort of desperately sorry and guilty about what happened, and he was angry about that and denied that was his feelings about these things. But if you look at everything he did in regard to the hydrogen bomb, everything he did in regard to trying to push the government to a particular type of policy, push the world towards one in which nuclear weapons were regulated internationally, they are the actions of somebody who absolutely understands the consequences of what he's done and is trying to make better. They are the action of a guilty person. And so in making the film, and the real answer for me to the question is what the film is and how you feel when you watch the film, truthfully. But that's why I made the film the way I made it, because I saw these very human, very relatable contradictions. And the irony for me when I watched the film, when I'd seen the film many times, and you start, because it's not my words, a lot of it is real words that people said, it's from transcripts and all the rest, and you start to see weird ironies who he was and what he wanted to do. And I think that gave me a powerful impetus for writing the way Strauss feels about it and what Strauss says about it, which I did invent. The feelings I think were genuine, but I've written words into his mouth in a way that I haven't with a lot of the characters. And I believe what he says about Oppenheimer. It doesn't make him right or wrong, but I think that he does see that the ego, the vanity, the things that fed into that. And I think he actually understands correctly as well Oppenheimer's. I found in Oppenheimer's approach to the security hearings, when I read the transcripts, I felt that there was some sense in which he understood that this would help his reputation longer term. His place in history would be a better one if he were made to suffer in this way. There's a sort of acceptance of things that I think very cleverly, very intellectually, he knew in a way, you know, he was sort of skiing down the hill too fast and kind of found a way off in a strange way. And I think we do think of him better because what happened with him was then so unfair. So he was seen to be punished for something that wasn't his fault. He was doing his duty. He was trying to save the world from the Nazis. But he had all these other motivations as well. Nothing simple.
And I think that's what the achievement of the movie is, guys. Because I think that the compartmentalization that you said is an intellectualization, is a survival mechanism to understand, reflect on it. What he was carrying in his soul, it's impossible to really accept it as it is. So you have to justify it intellectually some way. You have to have a narrative in your own way to get out of that weight, in my point of view. But I think what you did incredibly well was that the films, you did not give answers to the audience. You know, you left.
He never does.
That's why you choose this guy, and it could be very easily to give a moral lesson or a history lesson or that kind of cheesy thing. What is uncomfortable is that you end up that film and you end up with a very contradictory, a paradox situation where you never got this guy's sorry and cry and never got, you know what I mean? It was not like that. He was like always defending in some intellectual way something, and that is very uncomfortable, but that's the definition of reality. The definition of reality is contradiction and paradox. And in our society, we are not used anymore to that. Because these fucking telephones is about binary, yes or no, Democrat, Republican, bad, wrong, whatever. So we are not used to complex reality and that both things could coexist. And the guy, yeah, he did great things and he did incredible bad things. So I think that was a great achievement to not get into easy temptations. I want to ask you something. Well, I think I know that we have to finish. Do you want to stay one more question?
Yeah.
I want to say this, the film is so, in a way, visual and all the design. I mean, we could have talked here about all the music, wardrobe, production designers and all that. I would have loved to talk about how the process, but every frame in these silent, quiet, still frames that you are taking all these lives and we are seeing and understanding a very complex molecule and subatomic particles going into our lives that are now visually, it's so precise. I would like to understand how you work in terms of you rehearse that frames. Those frames are storyboards with Hoyte, the production designer, as producer. You have a time to rehearse and go to the locations and how those frames happen, or you arrive in the morning and you start one with your. What is your process to get the frames that you got? Either you preconceive or you half and half. What was your process in this film, which is so different from your other films? I'm very curious how you write those precise frames in this film.
I want to hear your answer to that.
Okay, so this film film was the production, the way it turned out was so informed by the sort of the prep, in my view anyway, it was so informed by the processes in prep that basically came out of a very intense budgeting process, whereby we were hoping to make the film, in, I don't know, 65, 70 days. We ended up having to shoot in 57 because we were really jammed for money.
You shot it in 57 days.
Yeah.
Single camera.
And this is the thing, we had a whole production, an idea of what production was going to be, that then shifted when we realised we didn't have enough money to do it that way. And I think that Chris, on all his films, he's very good at sort of being very precise about sort of telling everyone what he wants and doing lots of preparation, but then having maximum flexibility on the day. I think that's fair to say. That flexibility.
Which means he changed everything.
Yeah.
Maximum flexibility. I like that. I want to imitate.
Just means that he'll deal with things as they happen. On this film, I think it probably would have been a lot more planned, except for the fact that because we knew we were going to have to shoot in 57 days, Hoyter had one camera, he was carrying it on his shoulder. There wasn't a great deal of sort of formalism in the way.
There wasn't, and I think that the honest answer is that I don't tell people what I don't know. I'll stand there and I'll say, I want to bring the actors here, I want to see how it plays out, and we need to be able to see this or this. And sometimes you're saying, okay, I'll be okay not seeing that, but I don't storyboard, and I don't, unless there's a particular need. I've worked with a lot of the same people, multiple films. So Hoyter was a huge ally in this. When we told him how fast we were going to have to shoot, he fully embraced it. He said, okay, no steady camera, no cranes, we just had the camera, the dolly, tracks, a jib arm, And so it was a sort of, in some ways, a step back in terms of on the technical side, but it fit the energy of the characters. We had a huge cast, and what I needed to do every day is come in and let them find the scene, just rehearse it for real, not worry about where the camera's going to go, just me and the actors, and then Hoyter kind of peering in or whatever, but just let them play it like it's a real scene, it's a real scene, it's a real scene. And then, as that starts to naturally suggest things about how to shoot it, we start shooting. Because you know what it's like, you have a character, you have a scene of 12 people talking, you could shoot that for 3 weeks if you shot every island, if you tried to control it. So it would be more a process of see how it falls in. What if we put the camera over here and we just let it go around and see what we get and what we don't get.
But sorry to interrupt. I mean, you have incredible complex readings of beloved, incredible complex subject matters, politically, scientifically, and you have great actors. And I would like to understand if you have a reading table before, or suddenly Mike arrived and said, okay, you are a quantum physics guy. Come on, give the light.
And it works. It was a bit of both, in truth. I mean, with Robbie, he's an excellent case in point, because I had some conversations, phone calls, things, met him a few times, really wanted to work with him. I talked through the character, and I gave him the transcripts of the full congressional hearings. And he learned the entire thing. He learned way more than I actually took from the film. I gave him the script. I said I'd edited it down to this is what's going to be the script. And he turned up on the day and he said, well, I've learned all of it just in case you might want more.
And by the way, close up here.
And so, and it was sort of, it's brilliant working with intelligent actors. This is an incredible ensemble, every part. Our casting director, John Patch, did the most amazing job bringing together all of these different players. I didn't write any composite characters. So, if Louis Alvarez reproduced Splitting the Atom, and Louis Alvarez do that now, it's all Kim Plan. I just took the gamble that people will remember the faces they need to remember. They won't worry about names, they won't worry about who exactly does what. There'll be this feeling of camaraderie, this feeling of a group effort on this project. And so that energy kind of drove everything. But the key advantage to that, the reason it could work for this film fiction. You have to know everything. They come, they ask you a question, you have to
pretend.
You have to pretend. You know, where they have breakfast in the morning, all the rest. This was a very different experience. This was a room full of really talented actors who knew more about the characters than I did. And so they could improvise. So a lot of the GAC scenes led by Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss, and Killian, and all those other great actors, like Josh Hartnett, David Krumholtz, they would improvise. And improvise wildly. I would say, have an argument, have a fight about it, you know, whatever. And they were able to do that because they knew the characters so well. And very often you would then, we know that, to come back down to what was scripted for us. But in this incredibly playful manner, actors like Dana Hahn, who just, he would go a little crazy and throw all kinds of things in and give people things to react to. So they would be able to have these very, very heated political discussions the way they would have. And then we're able to just pick out with the camera and in the edit suite the bits that the audience needs to see, but the energy is there from all these other things. It's a very unique experience. I've never really been able to have an experience like that. And so really the answer to your question about the graphic side of it, the technical side, is all driven from that process, from those actors moving and talking the way they needed to, and then Hoyter and myself spying on it, and then finding the things we loved.